The sharp crack of Jack Morrison's fist connecting with the drifter's jaw echoed through the Golden Nugget like a gunshot, silencing every conversation in the smoke-filled saloon. The stranger crumpled to the sawdust-covered floor, blood streaming from his broken nose as Morrison stepped back, flexing his knuckles with satisfaction. The man had made the fatal mistake of questioning Morrison's honesty during their poker game, and in Copper Creek, Arizona territory, such accusations demanded immediate and violent correction. "Any other man in here think Jack Morrison's a cheat?" Morrison called out, his hand resting casually on the grip of his Colt .45. His voice carried the distinctive rasp of a man who'd breathed too much desert dust and drunk too much rotgut whiskey, but beneath the casual tone lay something far more dangerous. The three men flanking him at the poker table, Red Johnson with his missing front teeth, the cold-eyed Mexican Billy Santos, and young Pete Williams barely old enough to grow a proper mustache, all wore the same predatory smiles that had become their trademark across 3 territories. The saloon remained silent except for the labored breathing of the beaten man and the steady tick of the grandfather clock near the bar. Even Murphy, the barrel-chested Irish barkeep who'd seen more violence than most soldiers, busied himself polishing glasses while carefully avoiding eye contact with Morrison's gang. The other patrons, mostly local ranchers and a few traveling merchants, studied their drinks with sudden intensity, understanding instinctively that the wrong word or gesture could transform them from observers into participants. It was at this moment of tense quiet that the batwing doors creaked open, and Bella Jones stepped into what she would later recognize as the most dangerous place she'd ever entered. At 19, she possessed the kind of striking beauty that frontier towns rarely saw, with auburn hair that caught the lamplight like burnished copper and green eyes that spoke of intelligence and determination. But 3 days without a proper meal had hollowed her cheeks, and her once fine dress, now stained with road dust and torn at the hem, marked her as clearly as any brand might mark cattle. She paused just inside the entrance, her gaze taking in the scene before her with the quick assessment of someone who'd learned to read danger in men's faces. The beaten stranger on the floor, the 4 armed men at the poker table, the carefully averted eyes of the other customers, all painted a picture she understood too well. But hunger was a more immediate enemy than potential violence, and she pressed forward toward the bar where Murphy continued his methodical glass cleaning. "Excuse me, sir," Bella said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I'm looking for honest work. Cleaning, serving drinks, anything you might need. I haven't eaten in 3 days, and I'm willing to work hard for just a meal and perhaps a corner to sleep in." Murphy's weathered face softened slightly as he took in her desperate condition, but his eyes flicked nervously toward Morrison's table. "Miss, I'd like to help, but times are hard and—" "Well now, what do we have here?" Morrison's voice cut through Murphy's response like a blade through silk. He pushed back his chair and stood slowly, his spurs jingling softly against the wooden floor as he approached. Behind him, his 3 companions followed, creating a semicircle that effectively trapped Bella against the bar. "A fancy lady looking for work in our little establishment." The way Morrison emphasized the word work made several men in the saloon shift uncomfortably in their chairs. Bella felt her heart rate quicken, but she'd faced worse men than these in her short life, and desperation had long since burned away most of her fear. She met Morrison's gaze directly, refusing to show the weakness he was clearly seeking. "Honest work, sir. Nothing more than what any decent establishment would offer." Red Johnson let out a harsh laugh that revealed the rotted stumps where his front teeth had once been. "Decent establishment? Lady, you walked into the wrong place if you're looking for decent anything." His eyes roamed over her figure with an appreciation that made Bella's skin crawl, but she held her ground. "The sign outside says Golden Nugget Saloon," she replied evenly. "I assumed that meant you serve paying customers who might appreciate clean tables and prompt service." Billy Santos stepped closer, his hand resting on the silver-handled knife at his belt. "You got spirit, chica. I like that in a woman. But spirit don't pay for drinks, and from the looks of you, you ain't got 2 coins to rub together." Morrison held up a hand, silencing his companions with a gesture that spoke of absolute authority within their group. "Now, boys, let's not be inhospitable to our visitor." His smile revealed teeth yellowed by tobacco and neglect. "The lady says she wants to work for a meal. I think we can accommodate that request." He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a handful of coins, mostly pennies and nickels with a few dimes mixed in. The metal caught the lamplight as he held them up for everyone to see. "Here's your wages in advance, miss. More money than you've probably seen in weeks." Without warning, Morrison scattered the coins across the saloon floor, where they bounced and rolled in all directions, disappearing under tables and settling in corners thick with sawdust and tobacco spit. The metallic ringing seemed unnaturally loud in the suddenly silent room. "There's your payment," Morrison said, his voice taking on a tone of mock generosity. "All you have to do is collect it. Every last penny. And since you're so eager to work, you can do it properly, on your hands and knees like the good servant you claim to want to be." The humiliation of his demand hit Bella like a physical blow. She could feel every eye in the saloon upon her, some filled with pity, others with the kind of cruel anticipation that men reserve for watching others brought low. The rational part of her mind screamed to turn and walk out, to preserve what remained of her dignity and find some other way to survive. But her empty stomach cramped with hunger, and the coins scattered across the floor represented the first opportunity for food she'd seen in days. Pete Williams, emboldened by Morrison's display of dominance, kicked one of the coins further away from Bella's reach. "Better hurry up, lady. Sundown's coming, and we might decide to add some extra entertainment to your little performance." The threat in his words was clear, and Bella understood with crystalline clarity that her situation had moved beyond mere humiliation into something far more dangerous. These men weren't content with simply watching her grovel for money, they were building towards something darker, using her desperation as entertainment before whatever finale they had planned. She knelt slowly, her knees touching the rough wooden floor that countless boots had worn smooth. The sawdust felt gritty against her skin, and she could smell the accumulated odors of spilled whiskey, tobacco juice, and unwashed men that permeated the floorboards. As she reached for the first coin, her fingers trembling with a mixture of hunger and rage, she heard Morrison's laughter echo off the saloon's tin ceiling. "That's right, crawl for it. Show us how badly you want our charity." But as Bella's fingers closed around the first penny, something else entirely was happening outside the Golden Nugget. 3 riders had reined in their horses at the edge of town, their silhouettes stark against the setting sun that painted the Arizona sky in shades of orange and crimson. They sat motionless for several minutes, studying the building spread before them with the patience of men who'd learned that haste often led to early graves. The tallest of the 3, a lean man whose face bore the kind of scars that came only from surviving multiple knife fights, adjusted his hat and spoke quietly to his companions. "That's Morrison's horse tied up at the saloon. The bay with the white blaze." The second rider, younger but with eyes that held depths of experience far beyond his years, nodded grimly. 3 days we've been tracking them. 3 days since they hit the stage outside Tucson." The third man, whose silence carried more weight than most men's words, simply checked the loads in his rifle and slid it back into its scabbard. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the kind of quiet authority that made other men listen. "Time to finish this." Inside the saloon, Bella had collected perhaps half the scattered coins when Morrison decided to add a new element to his entertainment. "You're moving too slow, girl. Maybe you need some motivation." He pulled out his pistol, not aiming it at anyone in particular, but simply holding it where everyone could see the lamplight glinting off its polished barrel. The sight of the weapon changed the atmosphere in the room instantly. What had been cruel amusement became something far more ominous. Several of the local men quietly finished their drinks and headed for the door, unwilling to witness whatever Morrison planned next. Murphy continued cleaning glasses, but his movements had become mechanical, automatic, the actions of a man trying to become invisible. "Please," Bella whispered, her voice barely audible as she reached for another coin. "I just need something to eat." "Oh, you'll eat," Morrison replied, his voice now carrying an edge that made even his own men glance at each other nervously. "But first, you're going to earn every bite. Red, why don't you help our friend here understand what kind of establishment she's wandered into?" Red Johnson grinned and began unbuckling his gun belt, his intentions clear to everyone present. But before he could take more than a single step toward where Bella knelt among the scattered coins, the saloon doors burst open with enough force to slam them back against the walls. The three strangers who entered moved with the fluid precision of men accustomed to violence, spreading out to cover different angles of the room before most of the occupants even realized what was happening. The tall one with the scarred face positioned himself near the bar, his hand hovering inches from his gun. The youngest took the left side of the room, while the silent one moved to the right, creating a triangle of potential crossfire that encompassed Morrison's entire gang. "That's far enough, Morrison," the scarred man said, his voice cutting through the sudden tension like a blade. "Step away from the girl." Morrison's face went through several expressions in rapid succession, surprise giving way to recognition, then to a calculating assessment of his chances. "Well, I'll be damned. Tom Carter, as I live and breathe. Heard tell you were dead, killed in an Apache raid down near the border." "Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated," Tom Carter replied, never taking his eyes off Morrison. "Unlike the reports of your crimes, which seem to be entirely accurate." The name Carter rippled through the remaining customers like wildfire. Even in the remote corners of Arizona territory, the reputation of the Carter brothers had spread. Tom, the eldest, had served as a territorial marshal before disappearing 2 years earlier. Jake, the middle brother, had been a cavalry scout whose skill with both gun and knife was legendary. And Ben, the youngest, had earned his reputation in a series of gunfights that had left 7 men dead and established him as one of the fastest draws in the Southwest. Bella, still kneeling among the scattered coins, felt something stir deep in her memory at the name Carter, but the immediate danger of her situation pushed the thought aside. She began to slowly edge toward the bar, hoping to put some distance between herself and the confrontation that was clearly about to explode. Morrison's hand moved incrementally closer to his gun, but he was calculating odds, weighing his 3 men against 3 of the most dangerous gunfighters in the territory. "What's your business here, Carter? Last I heard, you'd lost your badge and your authority. This is just a friendly game of cards and some harmless entertainment." Jake Carter's laugh was cold as winter wind. "Entertainment? Is that what you call forcing a hungry girl to crawl on the floor for pennies while your animal of a friend gets ready to assault her?" "Now see here," Red Johnson started to protest, his hand dropping toward his gun, but Ben Carter's voice stopped him cold. "I wouldn't." The youngest Carter brother hadn't raised his voice, but something in his tone suggested that drawing that weapon would be the last mistake Red Johnson ever made. "Tom's got questions for Morrison. You can die now or wait your turn, but either way, you're going to die today." The certainty in Ben's voice was more terrifying than any threat or bluster could have been. This wasn't bravado or intimidation, it was simply a statement of fact delivered with the calm assurance of a man who'd never failed to keep such a promise. Murphy chose that moment to duck behind his bar, disappearing from sight as completely as if he'd never existed. The few remaining customers found sudden urgent business elsewhere, leaving only the 3 Carter brothers, Morrison's gang, and Bella, who remained frozen near the scattered coins, afraid that any movement might trigger the violence that hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. 2 years, Tom Carter said, his voice carrying across the silence like a judge pronouncing sentence. 2 years I've been hunting you and your men, Morrison. 2 years since you hit that stage outside Phoenix and killed that family." Morrison's facade of casual confidence finally cracked slightly. "Can't prove nothing, Carter. You got no badge, no authority, no jurisdiction here." "Don't need a badge for this," Tom replied, and for the first time, Bella caught a glimpse of something in his profile that sent another shock of recognition through her system. "This is personal now." The pieces of some larger puzzle were falling into place in Bella's mind, fragments of memory and recognition coalescing into something that made her heart race for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. But before she could fully grasp what her intuition was trying to tell her, Morrison made his decision and reached for his gun, transforming the Golden Nugget Saloon from a place of humiliation into a theater of death. The explosion of gunfire that erupted in the Golden Nugget lasted no more than 15 seconds, but in those brief moments, the saloon transformed into a symphony of violence that would echo in the memories of survivors for decades to come. Morrison's hand had barely cleared leather when Tom Carter's Colt appeared in his grip with the fluid motion of a striking rattlesnake, the muzzle flash illuminating his scarred face in stark relief against the saloon's shadows. Morrison's shot went wide, splintering the mirror behind the bar into 1,000 glittering fragments that cascaded to the floor like deadly rain. Tom's answering bullet caught the outlaw leader's center mass, spinning him backward into the poker table, which collapsed under his weight in an explosion of cards, coins, and blood. Red Johnson, moving with the desperate speed of a cornered animal, managed to clear his holster before Jake Carter's rifle spoke from the left side of the room, the heavy slug punching through Red's chest and slamming him against the wall where he left a crimson smear as he slid to the floor. Billy Santos, perhaps the most experienced gunfighter among Morrison's gang, had the presence of mind to dive for cover behind an overturned table while drawing his weapon. His shots forced Ben Carter to roll sideways, seeking protection behind a support beam, but the youngest Carter brothers' return fire was deadly accurate. 2 quick shots, fired so rapidly they almost sounded like one, found their mark despite the makeshift barricade. Santos jerked backward, his silver-handled knife clattering uselessly to the floor beside him. Pete Williams, the youngest of Morrison's crew, found himself facing a choice between certain death and surrender. His nerve broke entirely when he saw his 3 companions down and bleeding, and he threw his unfired weapon to the floor while raising his hands high above his head. "Don't shoot," he screamed, his voice cracking with terror. "I surrender. I give up." The acrid smoke of gunpowder hung in the air like fog, and through it, Bella could see Tom Carter moving carefully among the fallen men, checking each one with the methodical efficiency of someone who'd performed this grim task many times before. Morrison lay gasping, blood frothing from his lips as his life ebbed away with each labored breath. He tried to speak, his eyes fixing on Tom with hatred and something else, something that looked almost like recognition of a deeper truth. "You," Morrison wheezed, blood speckling his words. "You ain't just hunting us for that stage robbery. This is about the girl, ain't it? About what happened 2 years ago." Tom knelt beside the dying outlaw, his face a mask of controlled fury. "What do you know about 2 years ago, Morrison? What do you know about the fire at St. Catherine's?" Bella felt the blood drain from her face at the mention of St. Catherine's. The orphanage where she'd spent the first 17 years of her life had burned to the ground in what everyone said was an accident, a tragedy that claimed the lives of 12 children and 3 nuns. She'd been one of only 4 survivors, saved because she'd been working in the garden when the flames erupted through the building with supernatural speed. Morrison's laugh was a wet, bubbling sound. "Fire wasn't no accident, lawman. Was paid work, clean and simple. Though we didn't know there was supposed to be survivors left behind to identify who done it." The confession hit Tom Carter like a physical blow. His hand tightened on Morrison's shirt, lifting the dying man's shoulders off the floor. "Who paid you? Who wanted those children dead?" But Morrison's eyes had already begun to glaze over, and whatever secrets he might have revealed died with him as his body went slack in Tom's grasp. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by Pete Williams' whimpering and the soft settling sounds of the destroyed saloon. Jake Carter emerged from his position near the wall, reloading his rifle with practiced efficiency. "Tom, we need to get out of here before the local law shows up. You know they'll side with whoever's got the most money, and Morrison's been spreading cash around this town for months." But Tom wasn't listening. He was staring at Bella, who had risen from her knees and stood among the scattered coins with an expression of dawning comprehension. The profile that had seemed familiar, the name that had stirred her memories, the mention of St. Catherine's orphanage, all of it was coalescing into a truth that seemed too incredible to believe. "Thomas Michael Carter," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the ringing in their ears from the gunfire. "You were 17 when you left St. Catherine's. You said you were going to make your fortune and come back for your little sister." Tom's face went white beneath his tan. "Isabella Marie Jones. Bella. My God, you're alive. When I came back and found the orphanage burned, they told me everyone was dead. Sister Margaret, the children, all of them. I've been carrying that guilt for 2 years, thinking I failed you, thinking I should have been there to protect you." The emotional reunion was interrupted by Ben Carter's sharp warning. "Company coming. I can hear horses, maybe 6 or 7 riders heading this way fast." Through the broken front windows of the saloon, they could see dust clouds rising in the distance, illuminated by the last rays of the setting sun. Jake moved to the door and peered carefully around the frame. "It's Sheriff Whitman and a posse. They're armed and riding hard." Tom knew they had perhaps 3 minutes before the local law arrived, and Sheriff Whitman was Morrison's man through and through, bought and paid for with gold stolen from a dozen stage robberies and bank holdups. There would be no justice here, only a kangaroo court that would see the Carter brothers hanged and Bella disappeared permanently. The back door, Tom decided quickly. Pete, you're coming with us. You're going to tell a federal judge everything you know about Morrison's operation, or I'll let Ben here practice his knife work on you. Pete Williams nodded frantically, too terrified to do anything but comply. Ben gathered the young outlaw's weapons while Jake collected what money remained scattered around the poker table. Bella stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed by the rapid sequence of revelations and violence, until Tom took her gently by the arm. Bella, I know this is all happening too fast, but we have to move now. That sheriff isn't interested in justice, and if he gets his hands on us, we'll all end up in unmarked graves before sunrise. As they moved toward the saloon's rear exit, Bella's mind raced with questions and implications. The orphanage fire hadn't been an accident but murder, commissioned by someone with enough money to hire Morrison's gang and enough influence to cover up the crime afterward. Tom had been hunting Morrison not just for his recent crimes but for personal vengeance, believing his sister dead and seeking to balance the scales of justice. The back alley behind the Golden Nugget was narrow and choked with refuse, providing perfect cover for their escape but making it impossible to see potential ambushes. Tom led the way, his gun drawn and ready, while Jake brought up the rear with Pete Williams stumbling along between them. Ben stayed close to Bella, his protective instincts making him constantly scan the shadows for threats. They reached the livery stable where the Carter brothers had left their horses just as Sheriff Whitman's posse thundered up to the saloon's front entrance. Through the gaps in the stable's weathered siding, they could see the lawmen dismounting with weapons ready, preparing to storm the building they'd just fled. How much time do we have? Bella whispered as Tom quickly saddled a fourth horse for her use. Not much, he replied, checking the cinch with practiced efficiency. Whitman's corrupt, but he's not stupid. He'll figure out we went out the back within minutes, and then he'll start searching systematically. As if summoned by his words, they heard shouting from the direction of the saloon, followed by the sounds of boots running through the alley. Jake swore softly and grabbed Pete Williams by the collar. If you so much as breathe too loud, I'll gut you like a fish and leave you for the buzzards. The threat was delivered in a conversational tone that somehow made it more terrifying than any amount of shouting would have been. Pete nodded mutely, his face pale with terror in the gathering darkness. They led their horses out the stable's rear door and mounted quickly, Tom helping Bella up onto the sorrel mare he'd chosen for her. The animal was steady and experienced, the kind of horse that wouldn't panic under pressure or stumble in rough terrain. As they prepared to ride out, Bella felt compelled to ask the question that had been burning in her mind since Morrison's confession. Tom, if the fire was deliberate, if someone paid to have those children killed, then I'm still in danger, aren't I? Whoever ordered it will want to finish the job when they learn I'm alive. Tom's jaw tightened as he considered her words. We'll figure out who was behind it, Bella. But first, we need to get clear of this town and find somewhere safe to hold up while we question our friend Pete here about everything he knows. They rode out of Copper Creek under cover of darkness, following a game trail that wound through the rocky hills toward the distant mountains. Behind them, they could hear the sheriff's posse spreading out through the town, searching every building and questioning every resident about the strangers who had disrupted Morrison's reign of terror. Pete Williams, riding with his hands tied to his saddle horn, had remained silent during their escape, but as they put distance between themselves and the town, fear loosened his tongue. Morrison never told us who hired us for that orphanage job, he said suddenly, his voice carrying clearly in the still night air. But I heard him talking to Red one time about some big shot from back east, someone with political connections who needed a problem solved permanently. Ben Carter guided his horse closer to Pete's mount, his voice deadly quiet. What kind of political connections? Federal? Territorial? Local? I don't know for sure, Pete stammered. But Morrison was careful about it, real careful. Said the job was worth enough money to set us up for life, but that if we ever got caught, this big shot would have us killed before we could talk. The implications were staggering. Someone with significant political influence had ordered the murder of an orphanage full of children, and that same person would certainly try again if they learned that Bella had survived. The Carter brothers had stumbled into something far larger and more dangerous than a simple pursuit of outlaws. As they rode deeper into the wilderness, following trails known only to Apache raiders and desperate men, Bella found herself studying Tom's profile in the moonlight. The boy who had left St. Catherine's orphanage had grown into a man marked by violence and hardship, but she could still see traces of the brother who had promised to return for her. The question now was whether either of them would live long enough to uncover the truth about who had destroyed their childhood and why. The night air carried the scent of sage and distant rain, and somewhere in the darkness ahead lay answers that would either set them free or get them all killed in the attempt to find them.